Hello, and welcome to Begin Together, a podcast for couples who are healing from infidelity. I am your host, Janae Lindsay, and today we're going to dive into a question that I had recently, which is so important to look at if you don't already know. But the question that I got was, what is a formal disclosure? I'm hearing about formal disclosures. What are they? Is it like just your husband, telling you the truth about everything, or like, what is it? Um, and I think that would be a really helpful question to dive into, especially for those of you who might be in earlier stages of discovery. Maybe you have found out about your partner's deceptive sexual behavior and you're seeing this word everywhere and you don't know what it is. So, and maybe you are somebody who is familiar with the disclosure. Maybe you're a person who had like a botched disclosure, which is a very real thing. And so I just kind of want to walk through a little bit like, what even is a disclosure? What are some common misconceptions with a disclosure? What if it's taking a really long time to complete a disclosure? What is happening here? And let's just dive in because you could probably talk to a bunch of different, people who have experienced this and they'll have different opinions on it, or different therapists will also have different ideas about how to go through it. If you are watching my video, this book, it's called The Full Disclosure: How to Share the Truth After Sexual Betrayal by Dan Drake and Janice Caudle, I think is a really super, super helpful and thorough guide for anybody who is starting to walk that path. So just to share that resource, and I can link it for you as well. But what even is a disclosure? Let's just kind of back up because we have Discovery Day, and those are different things. Discovery Day is the day that you have discovered that that secret sexual basement exists, that that basement is underneath your home, and you don't know everything that's in there, but you have essentially learned that a basement exists. Um, that in and of itself is an incredibly traumatic injury, at least for most people, right? That's the car crash. That's the moment where your pre-existing reality, so everything that you believed and knew to be true to this point, and your actual reality come crashing into each other. And those are two cars colliding, and it's painful. And that's where we can end up in the hospital, right? Where we can end up in the emotional ICU with all of those injuries. And to be very clear, both people often are injured in that, actually. So the person who has had the basement, who has been hiding that basement, when that reality is discovered, their current behaviors are also colliding with their idea of who they actually are, their idea of who they present out to the world and what they let everybody see, right? So it can be pretty traumatic to have that reckoning, basically, like the mirror is really being held up to you um, in a very scary way. And you don't know the implications. You don't know how your wife is going to receive that information. So many people think like, okay, this is the end. Now my marriage and family are wrecked forever, right? Um, so actually, it can be very scary for everybody. Um, of course, for the betrayed partner, they're not the one who has been holding a secret compartment. So they are discovering for the first time a compartment that they never even knew existed. And for the betraying partner, they are aware of this compartment, but maybe they thought that this compartment was going to be locked and hidden away and kept private forever. But now it is out there, and that's a scary thing to look at, right? Anyway, so that's Discovery Day, the initial bomb being dropped, the initial car crash, whatever we want to call it. Different from disclosure is going to be the opportunity actually to learn about and unpack and uncover everything that has been kept hidden in that basement. So it's really the opportunity actually for the betraying partner to sit down with a facilitating, experienced therapist who has walked through this and read a letter that contains every part of their history and their story, and essentially just a really clear timeline of the behaviors. It's not necessarily meant to be incredibly detailed, but it's like, this is this is my stuff. Here it is. Here are the things that I've been engaging in. These are the deceptive sexual behaviors that have been having a very real impact on your life, on our marriage, on my own self, right? So this is when it started. This is how much, how often. This is how much money that I've spent on a behavior. These are the lies that I used to conceal this behavior. So, just a really thorough understanding and basically a very clear outline of everything that has happened. In a disclosure, typically there's also the opportunity to provide an accountability statement where the person who has betrayed is taking full, complete accountability for their behaviors. This part to me is really important because in order to maintain the basement, they have likely been engaging in some kind of um, justification to their own self, justification, rationalization. And oftentimes that can include their partner. The way that they are justifying and rationalizing their behavior might be connected to some story that they've been telling themselves about their wife or, the person that they've betrayed. So being able to just take full responsibility and full accountability and say some version of this is 100% something that I am exclusively and solely responsible for is actually a really important part of the disclosure letter. People also have options. So some couples might choose and this is really the preference of the betrayed partner. She might only want to know the deceptive sexual behaviors from the beginning of their relationship to now. Other people want to hear the whole sexual history. And I know when I'm walking through a formal disclosure with somebody, regardless of whether or not the betrayed partner wants to know the full sexual history or they just want to know what's happened in the context of their relationship, I still encourage the person who has maintained the deceptive sexual reality to take a full accounting and be really clear, especially to be able to be honest with their own selves and own it and make sense of their own story and their own stuff. So she, of course, would still have the option if she wants to hear all of that, but that's something that I would still very much encourage him to work through and write down and own. It's so interesting because some of what the research shows around disclosures is that D-Day is, of course, like incredibly distressing. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I know there's a study where partners rated on a 0 to 10 scale, like how much distress, how much disturbance. And D-Day was somewhere, 9.6 or something. Again, I'm making that number up, but it was somewhere in the nines, 9 point something. And then they also ranked disclosure day itself, so the actual disclosure, and then they also rated the time in between. So the highest was discovery day, and then the time in between discovery day and the disclosure, so where they're just wondering what is going on here, was also ranked very high. It was in the nines, 9 point something. And then disclosure day itself, so where they're actually getting the information, was ranked somewhere in the sevens, I think 7.7, which is just so interesting because I know often for the person who has betrayed, they are thinking that, oh my goodness, me putting all of this on paper, how is she going to react? This is going to ruin her. I can't say this. And just to know, like, one, the damage has already been done. So this is really the opportunity to do this in a much safer and more healing way, and in a way where she's not then just uncovering more information or there's like a trickle down disclosure or she's having to play detective. This is like, here it is. I'm ready to be fully honest and accountable for my stuff. So kind of cool to look at, like, the data is backing that up, that that's actually less distressing for her than the in between waiting period and the discovery itself, which I think is really important and critical to look at that. One, from a, I'm walking through this and I'm actually agreeing to do this and I'm going to show up in session on that day of disclosure perspective. One, from that lens of, yeah, this is a good thing. This is important that I'm doing this. And also just again, looking at the reality that the injury has happened, like the injury is already very much alive and well, right? But two, I think it's so critical to look at, like, if that in between period between discovery and disclosure is causing so much distress, then as clinicians, our facilitators of the disclosure, we need to be making sure that that distress is mitigated as much as possible. So you want to be able to do a very thorough disclosure, a really thorough accounting of that information, a very thorough owning of your behaviors and naming them very clearly, right? But what we don't want to do is have that take forever, because that can also contribute to treatment induced trauma for somebody. And for partners who maybe are like, I have waited so long for a disclosure and they've been in that distress place for who knows how long, that's also information unto itself. I remember chatting with Dr. Rachel about this, and she said that actually is its own disclosure. If this is taking like years for somebody to do, that is a disclosure in and of itself, what he's willing to do, what he's not willing to do. So, that's something to also look at, because you, as the betrayed partner and somebody who is choosing to stay married, and he's also choosing to stay married, you have the right to know what was happening in the basement that was underneath your home. You have a right to know what these deceptive sexual behaviors have been. And you have a right to know that actually in a really timely manner. I think Dan Drake and Janice Cottle in their book, they say a 6 to 8 week window. Like that time should not take longer than 6 to 8 weeks when you are prepping the disclosure. And some people might feel like, oh, wow, that's a really long time, and as therapists who are helping facilitate the disclosure, it might take a good chunk of time, because you want to make sure that this is thorough and complete and not something that somebody threw together the night before, right? So that's really critical. But longer than that, and we have our partner waiting in this highly distressing period, which is so, it's just wrong. It's actually wrong. For the partner to have to wait that long. You kind of run into this tricky spot, I would say, as a therapist. And of course, you kind of have to take it case by case. But, you know, well, do you have somebody write out their whole formal disclosure if they have a compulsivity problem and they are still actively engaging in these behaviors, right? It's like, how honest is somebody going to be able to be when they are still engaging and they haven't really maintained any level of sobriety or ceasing the behavior? And also, like, what headspace are they going to be in, right? Are they still going to be in this place of justifying, and that's going to prevent them from being really accountable on paper? So sometimes I think that increases the time frame that somebody is dealing with to be able to receive their whole formal disclosure. And that can be really tough. And that's challenging to navigate as a therapist, because you're also, okay, I'm working on strengthening this person's integrity muscle and strengthening their ability to be honest. And also, they're still actively having flips or relapses. So you want to be able to have some kind of period of sobriety. And also, to me, when I'm helping somebody walk through a disclosure, generally it's like, okay, well, we're sharing every single behavior up to this point. And that's now with the expectation that when or if a boundary violation happens in the future. So let's say pornography is one of the behaviors that you've kept in your basement, and then you view pornography after the full disclosure has happened. Well, now we're going to find a way to disclose that quickly and in an agreed upon manner with your partner. And she also gets to have the boundaries that she needs in order to have this feel safe. And you're going to have built-in accountability so that we don't ever have this situation again where it's all piling on and you have this entire secret sexual life. So this happening in a timely manner and in an accurate manner is really super important. And a therapist can push for that and provide resources for that and structure for that. And still, ultimately, it is the job of the person writing the disclosure to take care of it and do the thing and get it all, on paper and to truly be honest with themselves and with their spouse about all that they have been engaging in. And, a therapist can't write that for somebody else. They have to be in a place where they are ready and willing. And unfortunately, just because somebody's basement gets discovered doesn't mean that they're going to be ready and willing. Just want to kind of look at a few other things with a formal disclosure because I, over the years, have seen some interesting things, of course, happen with this. A formal disclosure is something that needs to be planned in advance, the actual session date, and that for sure the betrayed partner is fully aware that that's what she is stepping into. Popping into therapy one day, bringing your partner in, and then just dropping this bomb on her is not the same as a full formal disclosure that she is participant in and that she is consenting to, because her having some element of choice when she has had zero choice through this whole thing is really important. So something that is scheduled in advance. She's working with her therapist. You're working with your therapist. Both of you would be coming to that session and having support. So both partners would have support there ready for them. With a disclosure, of course, there's very sensitive information. And part of that, I always encourage couples come show up in separate vehicles, leave in separate vehicles, and then I encourage a minimum of 24 hours apart from each other without contact so that she doesn't feel any pressure to reassure him about everything that he has just told her. And he's also not seeking for reassurance um or necessarily even being peppered with questions too. I would say that would be a big thing for him, because she will have opportunities to write questions in advance for the disclosure session that he would have an opportunity to respond to as well. And also any question that she has afterwards, so important, and it still gets to be addressed. It's not like, oh, disclosure happened, so now she doesn't get to ask any questions. No, no, no. She still gets to ask any questions that she needs the answers to. But the 24-hour period right after a disclosure is typically not the best time to ask those questions. If there are questions also that come up during the disclosure, absolutely. But just 24 hours after disclosure is a really important time for just whatever kind of self care, rest, anything that you might need, and to be able to do that in a place and way that's really safe. A disclosure also can take any amount of time. So this is where a 50-minute therapy session is not going to cut it. Usually when I'm scheduling a disclosure, I will block off 3 hours in my schedule. And if 3 hours is needed, fine. And if it's not, that's also great. But I block that off because I want to make sure that there's enough time and space. And I know they actually can even take a longer time than that. So, which the therapists can often have a good idea if they need to be scheduling more time than that. But just also to be able to give yourself permission that whatever comes up for me emotionally during this is valid and it makes sense. And yeah, riding the wave of those emotions as they pop in. One of the biggest misconceptions that people think is, okay, when I share all of this with her, my spouse is going to leave me. She's not going to be able to handle it. And that's going to be it. And of course, that is an option. Of course, she has the choice if this is something that she's done with, right? She gets to choose that. Absolutely. And also, a lot of times not what happens. That fear, that honesty about your behaviors is going to be the thing that destroys your relationship is actually not the thing that destroys your relationship. Secret keeping, withholding information, lying, those are going to be the things that destroy your relationship. I would also say that I think a lot of people have, maybe that one thing that like, I don't want to say this. I don't want to put this onto paper. And that thing is hiding behind a curtain for a reason. That thing is probably one of the most important things for you to share because part of what happens here too, when you have been honest about that, then when your partner ultimately is like, I still choose you and I still choose our marriage and our relationship, if that's the outcome that happens, that's actually incredibly healing because the thing that you felt the most shame about, like, guess what? She's still here. She's choosing you anyway, and or if that's the thing that is okay, like I am done and our marriage needs to end, she is having agency and the full information, and she is choosing you or not with all of the information on the table. And there's always that question, right? If you do withhold something, it's like, well, if she really knew me or if she really knew this piece, would she still be there? And if I'm not being honest about that, how would I know? So, those are just a couple things there. I have heard of situations where therapists will actually encourage somebody to withhold certain information or say like, oh, that detail is not necessary or important. I was chatting with somebody who felt like it wasn't important for somebody to know the specific furniture that the husband had had sex with somebody else on. And he felt like the wife really wanted that information and this therapist like didn't see why that was necessary. And my mind was blown, you guys, because immediately upon finding information like that out, wouldn't you be dragging your couch out to the curb and like burning that couch or that piece of furniture? And maybe you wouldn't, but at least you would know and you would have the option. So, and from the therapist perspective, I think it was like, oh, this is bad enough that this happened in their home at all, right? Yes, it is bad enough that it happened in their home at all, of course. And also, this is a very important detail for the wife. So I actually don't think therapists, it's not actually our responsibility to be the gatekeeper for what the wife wants information for. And I think that's a perfectly legitimate thing to want information for. And I'm guessing like most people hearing this would also agree with that, right? But anyway, I thought that was so interesting because I think therapists sometimes will do this thing of like, I don't want to create any more trauma and wounds. And it's like, you guys, the trauma is already there. The trauma is there. The wounds are there. The bomb has gone off. Truth is the avenue for healing. So while I understand that there may be some details for partners that are like, how is this going to serve you to know? If right. Many of those details, especially the things that they have the most questions about, are going to be important and necessary for them to know. So, just by nature of like, this is something I actually probably don't even want to know because who even wants to ever know that information? But this is something that I feel like I need to know, right? Anyway, so those are just some of those things that can happen, which is why I would be really intentional about the process that you choose for this, the person that you work through this with. I have seen disclosures be really healing, and then I've seen people who have had to go through multiple disclosures because also there were lies and omissions that my goodness, the partner then had to piece together more information and then walk through a whole other disclosure. If I could say anything about them, it's just be radically honest. Be radically honest through this process. And if you're having a hard time doing that, go to your therapist or your person you're working with and literally say the words, I am having such a hard time being radically honest about X, Y, and Z. This is a part of my life that I never thought that I would share. And I'm so scared to say it. I'm even scared to say it to you, therapist, out loud. I don't want to say these words because maybe that actually means that they're true. Okay, say the words, be honest, right? So other thing that I would just say is potentially there are legal implications for certain behaviors in your state. So if there's things that you're disclosing that in your state would be reportable, that's something to consider, and you can ask your therapist like directly even before beginning that process. And also, I would say that like if there are things legally that need to be addressed, that probably there's a higher level of support, right? That's needed, or a higher level of accountability and care. That's why we have certain laws saying that things are illegal. So you can navigate that with your therapist in terms of what you will put on paper, what you will say out loud, like knowing that laws vary between states. And also, while that might make you want to withhold more information, I think, like, again, a higher level of accountability might be needed if we have entered illegal behavior territory. Anyway, I know that's a lot and I know it's scary. I feel like couples who take the step towards disclosure, there's an exceptional amount of courage and bravery that takes. And I've also seen very firsthand how healing that can be. If you don't have a therapist in your area who facilitates disclosures, there are options all over the country for intensives. You can contact us, see if we'll do an intensive. Like, just there, we have multiple therapists who are trained in disclosures here. There very well may be some options in your state, and it's just critical. It is a crucial part of this process. And most couples actually are grateful that they did it. There is healing and there is strength in stepping into truth and integrity, even when those truths are incredibly painful. I heard somebody say recently that they thought, having that basement was a source of strength for them. And what they have realized is that actually stepping into truth and stepping into integrity makes them feel stronger than they've ever felt and even more connected with their masculinity. And that was so cool and powerful to me to hear from somebody. But um, I hope that is helpful. We could probably talk about disclosures forever, but those are just some of the pieces that I think are helpful things to consider and to have some awareness around if you're beginning to navigate this process. I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for your ears. Thank you for being here today. Also, if you are a couple who would like to work with us, we do have a couples program, and that's really for couples who are just starting this process of healing. So really like your first 90 days, a lot of information and just accountability and care. So reach out about that if you are interested. Take care, and I will see you in the next episode.